Not all heroes wear capes. One such hero is the legendary FUNMILAYO Ransom KUTI, an educator, political campaigner, and women's rights activist. Imagine living in a world where standing up for justice could cost you everything. That was FUNMILAYO's reality. It all started with a sudden explosion and a brutal invasion. But that was just the beginning. From fighting oppressive taxes in the market to challenging the colonial powers, FUNMILAYO's courage is truly unmatched. How did she unite women in a fight against injustice? The story is packed with heart, heroism, and history. You won't want to miss how it unfolds. Stick around till the end. It is February 1977, and FUNMILAYO, who stays with her son, is relaxing on the veranda reading a newspaper. All of a sudden, she hears an explosion. Policemen burst out from everywhere, pouring fuel around and lighting up the surroundings. She quickly runs into the house and alerts her children of the ongoing chaos. She's headed towards the stairs to stop policemen from invading the house when she sees that they have already even entered. To make matters worse, they push her down and begin to ask for Fela. They threaten to kill her if she doesn't tell them where Fela is. Policemen invade the house, throw everyone around, and scattered everywhere. The policemen drag FUNMILAYO to the balcony, angrily demanding for Fela. When she doesn't tell them where Fela is, they carry her and throw her down from the balcony. FUNMILAYO has just woken up in the hospital. Outside, Dolapo is speaking with the doctor when she sees the Oyibo journalist. She excuses herself and attends to the journalist who has come to interview FUNMILAYO. Dolapo tells her that she's unhappy to grant her the interview with her mother. The only reason she's granting the interview is because FUNMILAYO herself insisted on allowing the interview to be held. The journalist thanks Dolapo and promises not to spend much time. Dolapo then grudgingly tells the journalist that her mother is in room 14. Isabel, the journalist, gets to FUNMILAYO's room and introduces herself as a news reporter. Isabel is happy to see FUNMILAYO, who asks how long she has been waiting. Isabel says she has waited only a couple of days, but she isn't counting. FUNMILAYO smiles and says patience is indeed a virtue. The interview begins, and the first thing Isabel asks FUNMILAYO to talk about is her father. FUNMILAYO introduces her father as the son of one of the free slaves who found his way to Egba land. She says her father was her driving force and her rock. He taught her to push boundaries and to fly. Back then, she was known as Frances Thomas. She was only 13 years of age when she finished primary school. Her father had other plans for her. We switch to the young FUNMILAYO, who is known as Frances. She's reading a book late in the night when her father passes by her room. He sees her reading and he stops by her room. He's impressed that she takes after him in reading. He comments that she has taken first person 12 times at St. John, her primary school. He then asks what skill she wishes to learn. She says she's fine with the tailoring he wants her to learn. Her father then says he has another plan. She will go to grammar school and then from there, college. He says the only way to win against the colonialists is to study and know what they know. She brings up the concern of having to go to Lagos for her secondary school education, as the only secondary school in Abeokuta is for boys. Her father asks her not to worry, as where there is a will, there's surely a way. Frances goes with her father to Abeokuta Grammar School. The principal admits her to the school and tells her she's the first female in the school. Her first day at school is chaotic. Some group of senior boys accost and bully her for having the temerity to attend an only boys school. They carry her and are about to toss her into a nearby well when the head boy Israel shows up and saves her from them. He orders the boys to put her down and then punishes them with hard labor for bullying. He then sympathizes with her for her mistreatment and explains to her that to survive in an only boys school, she has to learn to soak up the oil, and she does just that. Once during a class, a boy tosses a paper at her for no reason at all. She gets up and slaps him very hard across the cheek. The teacher teaching them would ask her to head to the principal's office to report herself, even though she was only standing up for herself. Frances and Israel start to get closer to each other. He proposes that they start exchanging correspondence, which she agrees to only after initial shakarado. Time flies and soon Israel gets a scholarship and has to leave for college in Freetown. Frances makes him promise to write to her every week. He keeps to his promise as they both exchange correspondence every week. A year before Israel's return, she leaves for England to further her studies. They, however, keep sending letters to each other. Frances informs him that she has taken up her native name, FUNMILAYO, for use in London, and she's no longer addressed as Frances. Finally, it is time for her to return to Nigeria. She comes home to Israel, whom she's so happy to see. A year later, he proposes that he wants to spend the rest of his life with FUNMILAYO, and so he takes her to see his father. He introduces her as a school teacher and owner. While she and his siblings get on very well, FUNMILAYO and Israel's father, Reverend Adesanya, are like two sides of a coin. FUNMILAYO believes that education is for everyone, but Reverend Adesanya thinks that if a parent wants their child to do something else apart from education, then the child must do just that. Again, FUNMILAYO says the whites are racist because of how they look down on the blacks, whereas they are worshipped in Nigeria. Reverend Adesanya, however, believes otherwise. He thinks FUNMILAYO is being judgmental. After all, didn't the white men introduce them to Christianity? Funmilayo says there is no big deal in the Christianity they introduced to the blacks. Didn't they have their gods like Ogun, Obatala, and Esu before then? It is at that point that the Reverend loses it. So she believes in Esu and not God Abi, and she wants to marry his son who believes in God? No way. Funmilayo and Israel, however, get married. Surprisingly, Funmilayo and Reverend get along very well before he passes away. After marriage, Funmilayo continues teaching since it is her passion. One day, she goes to see Mama Supo, one of the market women whose son attends her school. She has come because Supo didn't attend school the previous day, and she's hoping that through Supo's continual attendance, other market women will be inspired to bring their children to school too. She's still speaking with Mama Supo when the market is suddenly in disarray. A group of village tax collectors have come to the market to collect their usual head tax. The leader of the tax collectors orders his men to go into the market and seize the women's goods. He says if they need their goods, they will pay their head tax. Funmilayo, however, stands up for the women, and when the leader of the tax collector tries to talk down on her, she slaps him. Because she is from one of the respected families in the village, especially since she's educated, the leader of the tax collectors cannot do anything to her. He leaves the market fuming. The market women are, however, divided into two groups. Some of them are grateful for Funmilayo's support, while the rest say she's starting to overdo her heroic acts in the village, and soon it will backfire. Mama Supo brings her son to school the following day and commends Funmilayo's acts of the previous day. She says the last time they had witnessed such heroism was when they last had an Iyalode. Funmilayo worries that some of the market women were not pleased with her actions and that there is the possibility of the tax officials returning. Mama Supo asks her not to worry, that they can only hope that the tax collectors do not return. To prevent their return, Funmilayo heads straight to the district colonial's office in Abeokuta. She's one of the few educated and respected people, so she's allowed access to the office. She meets an alumnus of her school who works as a secretary for the district officer. They exchange pleasantries and she's led to the district officer. The district officer, Mr. Dundi, sees no reason for her to be in his office. For one, he is unaware that the Egba market women, whom Funmilayo claims to be representing, even have a plight. Then he questions her capacity to represent them in his office. Isn't she a school principal? How is she then connected to the Egba women? He dismisses her and says if she has better things to say, she could as well say it. Otherwise, she had better take her leave. Funmilayo takes her leave, but not without telling Mr. Dundi that he lacks manners. Funmilayo returns to Egba and visits the shop of her sister-in-law, Eniola, who sells Adire fabrics. She's impressed by Eniola's shop, but worries about the tax collectors. Eniola says there's nothing anyone can do about them as there is no Iyalo there to represent their interest. When Funmilayo asks, Eniola explains to her that the king has refused to install a new Iyalo there after the death of the previous one. Funmilayo suggests that the Egba women come together and have one voice. Over the months, Funmilayo reaches out to other Egba ladies, who in turn reach out to elite ladies. Together, they form the Abeokuta Elite Club. The club empowers women through adult education classes and various teaching of skills. This doesn't, however, stop the tax collectors from disturbing the market women and seizing their goods. Funmilayo is not pleased with this and calls for a meeting with the Elite Club. She suggests that they dissolve the club and come up with another club called the Abeokuta Women's Club, as she feels that the Elite Club is not connecting properly with the market women. Some of the elite women will not have it. While some of them think it's a good idea, the other women find it odd and illiterate women would be allowed to breathe the same air as them, let alone join the club. The aged Funmilayo stops her narration to Isabel as it is her bedtime and she's feeling drowsy. Isabel promises to come the next day. The following day, Isabel returns and meets Funmilayo with her children. She apologizes for disrupting their meeting and proceeds to wait outside, when Funmilayo says there will be no need for that. Dolapo, however, grumbles that she doesn't like the attention that the whole incident is bringing to the family. The children start to lay the blame on themselves. Dolapo says if only Funmilayo didn't go to visit Fela on the day they did, they wouldn't be facing problems now. Fela says it isn't his fault that the policemen came. Funmilayo chases everyone out of her hospital room and says she needs fresh air. Only Isabel is allowed to be near her. They both go outdoors and there, Funmilayo continues her narration. After the dissolution of the Elite Club, Funmilayo visits the market and Eniola, only to see that the tax officials come around again and destroy a lot of goods. Funmilayo gathers the women together and tells them they need to come together as one and fight against these people. One of the women, however, gets up and asks the rest of the women not to answer Funmilayo. She says Funmilayo is educated and has not lived all her life in Egba. Hence, if anything happens, she can easily run and hide under the shadow of her husband. Funmilayo takes her time to explain that she's fighting for the women. After all, isn't she standing before them as a woman? Before she attends the next meeting, her husband advises that try to build oneness with the women. To do this, she gathers the women again together. This time, there's no seclusion. All women are dressed in native clothes and speak Yoruba. Funmilayo asks them to say what they have faced at the hands of the tax collectors, and the women start to talk. Gathering the grievances of the women, Funmilayo goes to the palace to see Kabiyesi. As is custom, she kneels to greet the king and requests if she can stay the rest of her course on her feet. But one of the chiefs calls her a rude woman and asks her to say whatever it is she has to say while on her knees. She swallows her resentment and says she has come on behalf of the Abeokuta Women's Club. The chief quickly calls her short and says the Kabiyesi does not recognize their club. Funmilayo says she has written a couple of times to the palace about the club and the agitation for a reduction in taxes. The first chief cuts her short again and says it is a taboo for her to bring such discussion to the palace. He says as a result, taxes will be increased by 10%. Funmilayo has no choice but to leave the palace. After all, he who runs lives to fight another day. Although in this case, she didn't run. She returns to the women and tries to ginger them not to give up in the fight. Some of the women have refused to sell their goods because of constant threats by the tax collectors. Unknown to Funmilayo, the club has been infiltrated. While she says they should march to the palace to protest, some women agree while some disagree. Those who disagree have an excuse of their husbands being titled or upcoming chiefs, hence their inability to join the women in the protest. The women who agree to march with Funmilayo to the palace and they begin their protest. They chant tirelessly day and night. The chiefs tell the Kabiyesi that they have to do something about the women, but he retorts that if they are scared of mere women and do not know what to do, then they should kuku be looking. Another day, the king sends out the Oru, masquerades that women are forbidden from seeing. In response, the women send out a group of elderly traditional women who bare their bodies, daring the men to touch Funmilayo or any of the women. The Oru have no choice but to leave the women alone. Soon, the protest becomes widely heard of, so much that the Lagos press carries it. Mr. Dundi sends a representative to the palace to tell the king to find a way to end the protests. Kabiyesi says he cannot give in to their demands. The Oyibo man says he doesn't have to give in to their demands. He can instead reduce the tax by 10%. The king relays this to Funmilayo and two women whom he asked to come into the palace for a discussion. Funmilayo and her women, however, disagree. It's either the taxes are completely lifted or there's no backing down. Kabiyesi says Funmilayo has now grown wings and he will surely clip them for her. Mr. Dundi asks the royal guards and the tax collectors to push the women away if they don't leave the palace anytime soon. Since Funmilayo and her women would not leave the palace, the men ended up pushing the women and beating them up. Funmilayo and the other women who spearheaded the protests are thrown into a cell. In the cell, Funmilayo thinks of giving up, but she remembers how her father used to encourage her not to give up on her dreams. She therefore says she won't give up. When she's released to go home, she barely rests before she says she wants to return to continue the protest. Dolapo, who has just become a nurse, pleads that she rests some more before she continues the protest, especially as she sustained a head injury. Funmilayo will have none of it. She says they have to continue the protests. Her husband, Israel, tries to convince her not to go yet, but she says she has to do what must be done. He has no choice but to let her go. Dolapo worries about her father's health, especially as he hasn't told Funmilayo that he's sick. He hugs his daughter and asks her not to worry. Funmilayo and her women return to the palace in larger numbers than before. They have women from other towns come to join them in the fight. At first, the Alake of Egba land, that is, the Kabiyesi, thinks the women would get tired and leave. But when they do not, he's forced to run away. He intends to leave with his staff of authority, but the women break into the palace and seize the guards that are with the staff. They beat them up and retrieve the staff from him. Alake has no choice but to run away without his staff. The women are victorious and celebrate their win. The Abeokuta Women's Union was inaugurated into the Native Security Council. The aged Funmilayo stopped narrating and let out a sad sigh. Isabella asks what the matter is, and Funmilayo says although the women won, she lost. Her husband was down with cancer and hid it from her till she was done with her fight for women. He passed away 1 year after she lost her father. Funmilayo says all she ever did and became was through the help and support of her husband. Isabel sympathizes with her on her loss and thanks her for sharing her story. While she leaves, Funmilayo spends the rest of the day reliving the memories of the sweet times she had with Israel, her late husband.